Hi, hello and welcome. You are excited, I'm excited. Let's talk about the new Mothership 12 Petalmorphosis palette from McGrath Labs, which was just released a couple of days ago on March 20th. Now, this is the first time or a very long time since McGrath has released a Mothership palette in the spring months. I want to say that actually this is the first time that we're seeing a Mothership palette in the spring months. So far, they've only been summer, fall / winter releases, and I'm delighted that she has decided to give us her spring offering in the form of a Mothership palette, especially after 2 years of speculation whether this format will be coming back at all. Given that the last Mothership that was released in the summer of 2023, Sunlit Seduction Mothership 11, has been almost 2 years, and you know, she's been releasing them yearly, so it was a bit strange when she skipped a year. Moreover, I'm not entirely sure how well Sunlit Seduction did, because at least from the reviews that I watched, people were not elated about it. Personally, I didn't buy this palette, so I can't say anything about it. It was not at all my color story, and I was really tired of the pinks and the golds. Now, I will open this video with the same statement that I opened my emergency meeting video. If you come to tell me that this is another pink and gold palette from McGrath Labs, then click away, because this is not going to be the video for you. I've discussed at length already how I feel about this whole release, the positives, the negatives about it in my emergency meeting video. But just to summarize, overall I'm actually quite pleased that she's finally giving us something different, because to me Petalmorphosis is very different. It's definitely a step in the right direction, a step in a different direction compared to, you know, Divine Rose, the sequels that we've been getting for the past 4 to 5 years. So I'm absolutely thrilled that we're seeing something different from the brand, and you know, I want to encourage them to keep doing the same thing. At the same time, I realize that there's been a step down in quality in several different aspects. We've touched upon the Baked Gelée Astral Bliss shades, which are not present in her Motherships anymore. Since Mothership 9 Utopian Dream, we haven't had a single baked shadow in a Mothership palette. Moonlit Seduction, Sunlit Seduction, and now Petalmorphosis do not feature any of these baked shades. And these Baked Gelée formulas, they are clearly more expensive to make. They've cut costs here and there. I can also see a little bit now with the black lacquer packaging. We will talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, overall there's been a little bit of a step down in quality. Now, I will say this, when I purchased Moonlit Seduction, I was so disappointed that the baked shades were gone that I more or less, I didn't hate, but I made my feelings very clear on this new formula, that I just wasn't a huge fan of it. I will say this, in the meantime, Moonlit Seduction has grown quite a bit on me. I have an appreciation for this formula. It's still not the same as a plain metallic or satin formula. Obviously, it doesn't have the versatility and the sophistication of a Baked Gelée formula, but it is also not a bad formula. It is still versatile, it is still pretty, it is still very dimensional and sparkly on the lids. So I've grown to like Moonlit Seduction despite the lack of baked shades. Now, this new palette, as you will also have appreciated from, you know, what you have seen so far online, leans a little bit more on like the purple green side of things, especially if you also consider the outside packaging, which is very much like purple, teal and green, and I think it is just such a beautiful combination of colors. I think this represents the spring season quite beautifully. Spring seen through the prism of McGrath, because I am sure that McGrath herself was involved in the creation of this color story. This may not be the same, you know, quality as, let's say, Motherships 1, 2 and 3, but you can feel Pat's touch in here. So she was definitely very much involved in making this palette. Now, since I mentioned the outside cardboard packaging, I wanted to say a few words about it too. Now, I absolutely love the outside cardboard packaging of McGrath Labs Mothership palettes. I keep all of them, they're all on display. I admire them as if they were a piece of art, and to me they are really a piece of art, and I've enjoyed them ever since the first Motherships were released. So I will say this, I was so thrilled to see also something different in the outside cardboard packaging and like the artwork on these palettes, because even in that sense I felt like past Divine Rose 1, things had started to get very repetitive, to the point where even the outside box wasn't, you know, exciting me anymore. And when I saw the outside box of this, I thought, oh my gosh, this is so pretty. I absolutely love it. I love all the details on her packaging. I love the combinations of the colors. Yeah, this just speaks to me. Purple and green is a combination that I've always really loved, and I absolutely love the outside packaging. The outside packaging doesn't feel in any way different to me. We're still getting the strings here. It still feels weighty. Honestly, it feels exactly like all of her other palettes. You have all the eyeshadows with the ingredient list on the back. This eyeshadow palette is made in Italy, as all of her motherships have been made in the past. I wanted to say a few words about the shipping. I want to compliment their shipping and, you know, the whole release thing. So let's go back to the release. When I reviewed Luminous Legends in the fall, so that was her fall, her holiday collection release for 2024, I had mentioned that something was different with the release as well, because usually when you sign up for the early VIP access, or you have just participated in a Pat McGrath Labs release, you will know that there's always a 10% off code running for the first like few days of the release. And when Luminous Legends was released, there was no 10% off code, and they were very clear there isn't going to be one. I speculated that that might have been because the 10% off code was somehow already worked into the price of the palette, because I thought, given the quality of the eyeshadows and the number of eyeshadows in that palette, the price was pretty justified. So this release luckily brought back the 10% off code, and not only that, but it also, you know, I had once again a wonderful interaction with the customer service from Pat McGrath Labs. So I bought the palette about 10 minutes before the official VIP early access release, and as it turned out, the 10% off code hadn't been activated yet, so all of us who were too impatient and went to buy the palette before the official launch could not make use of the 10% off code. But you know, I was already on the website, I was at work, I was already on the website, I had everything in my cart, I was ready to check out, and I thought, fuck it, I'm just going to check out because I don't have time to deal with this, and then I will message with customer service, because this has happened to me before, at least once, that the 10% off code didn't work and they refunded me immediately. And interestingly, this time when I interacted with customer service, I first received a response which almost seemed like it was like a pre-made response, and I was getting, you know, a response from a chatbot, because it essentially said a few generic things like, oh, the reasons that the code might not be working are the following, but I will forward your inquiry to somebody. So I thought, okay, let me interact with a human and see what happens. Luckily, I interacted with a lovely lady called Shannon, and she immediately reimbursed me for the 10% off. This brings me to another very interesting thing. So when I opened the website, this palette was priced at 120 euros. So I live in Europe, I live in the Netherlands, so everything here is in euros. I don't know about any other country, but anyway, in the Netherlands, this palette was priced at 120 euros, and I thought, have these gone like somewhat like back in price or something? But then I checked, and all the other motherships were still 129 euros, and I thought, well, lucky me, I'm not going to say anything. So overall, I paid 108 euros for this palette. A few days later, I noticed that, not even a few days later, I want to say maybe the same day later, they had already adjusted the price to 129. So I think what happened is that someone made a typo boo-boo, because the 0 and the 9 are like literally next to each other, and they mistyped the price. Then to go back to the shipping, already the previous time I had commented that finally Pat McGrath Labs have at least one European warehouse, and the European warehouse that I get my products shipped from for the past two releases has been in Eindhoven. And Eindhoven is a city which is like about a 50-minute drive from where I live, so it's very close by. And I want to say that my palette would have arrived even earlier. I think it would have been here on Saturday. So I ordered on Thursday, they shipped it on Friday. And I want to say that it would have been here on Saturday had it not been for the fact that, for whatever reason, the shipment had a little detour via Brussels. Brussels is in Belgium, it's like a different country, it's several hours away from here. So, you know, unlike me, who has never actually been to Brussels, my palette has. There's one more thing I wanted to mention when it comes to like them cheapening a little bit the palettes, because as I mentioned, the Blitz Astro shades no longer baked. However, what I noticed is, I was looking also at the black lacquer packaging. Oh yeah, the palette comes in two different offerings, in a black lacquer packaging and a lilac lacquer packaging, and the first 100 people to buy the lilac packaging also had one that was signed by Pat McGrath. It's a bummer that she didn't sign any of the black ones, because I would have liked to have Pat's signature on my palette, but it was much less important to me. I considered the black lacquer against these colors to be just more aesthetically pleasing. The lilac, like all of these colors against the lilac backdrop, just was not working for me. I didn't find it very like aesthetically pleasing to look at, And it also made me realize that she had already released like this lilac lavender type black lacquer limited edition packaging for Mothership 5 with like the Bergdorf, like a department store, I think it's like a luxury department store. And she had like this limited edition palette for the Mothership 5 in this same-ish looking lilac lavender type lacquer packaging, but the inside of that palette still had a black backdrop on it. So if that had been the case also for this new one, I would have definitely purchased the limited edition lilac packaging because it is very pretty. I have several of those like limited edition Pat McGrath palettes and I don't mind. I would have absolutely loved to have the lilac version of it, but I just really didn't like the all lilac idea of it. So I want to say that the last time I checked, which was recently, like yesterday evening, the lavender lilac case was still available, so it didn't sell out. It didn't sell out in the way that the pink chrome of Divine Rose 2 sold out. I don't think people are going to fight over it, so depending on your taste, you can still purchase one over the other. So like I said, because I didn't buy Sunlit Seduction and I had heard that they had even like made some adjustments to the black lacquer packaging to make it a bit cheaper, I inspected this palette as soon as it arrived. Okay, I took out my magnifying glass and I was like, okay, let's see whether there's anything different. Like on the front part, nothing is different, everything is the same. You still have the beautiful logo of Pat McGrath Labs here with the little golden plating, but then I turned the palette around and I was like, what the F is this? What kind of like knockoff gold is this? Because this, like the black gold plating here is different than what it used to be. This feels very plasticky and very cheap looking. Imagine when you buy knockoff gold jewelry and that's very like gaudy and cheap looking and tacky. This is how the this is how the gold plating on this palette looks like, and I just wanted to compare it for you to the Moonlit Seduction palette, which still has the older gold plating on the back, which first of all has more of like that sophisticated matte gold finish to it, but also all of the lettering here and here for the logo and a lot of the details here, they are etched into the palette. Is that how it's called? I think it's etched or engraved, whatever it's called. In the case of the new palette, nothing is etched or engraved, it's just... Well, actually, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is... I don't know. This doesn't seem to be etched to me. I think it's just written on the gold plating. So to me, this looks definitely a little bit cheaper and it's really not my style. Just, you know, the same metaphor applies. If you're buying true gold jewelry versus cheap knockoff gold jewelry, it's the same difference. But the rest still feels very weighty. It feels just like before, you know, if you smack someone on the head with it, they're going to get a concussion. So I think those were all the like more general things I wanted to say. So between this video and the emergency video, I've said so much about the release of this palette. Now the way I'm going to do this video is now I'm going to leave you with the swatches and a lot of comparison swatches. I tried to be as thorough in my comparisons as I possibly could. If I've missed anything, please let me know. But I will see you in a little bit to do a first look with the palette, and I plan to do like a week off, but it will really depend on how tired I am and how much work I have. So I will try to do several looks with this palette for sure within the next days, but I can't promise that it will be a week off. It will be, you know, several looks with Petalmorphosis. So I'll see you in a little bit to do a look, but for now I'm leaving you with the swatches. Alright you guys, so the palette literally just arrived like 15 minutes ago and I already swatched it by myself because I really just wanted to take a minute to feel the shadows myself, to see what they look like, to see whether I lean towards disappointment or excitement. And I have to say, upon initial swatches I feel a little bit more inclined to be quite excited about it, but I wanted to do quick swatches with you, so I suggest we go through the actual swatches of the palette fairly quickly because nothing you haven't seen before. I actually think the more interesting part of this video is really going to be the comparison swatches, and I will try my best to be quite extensive about it, especially for those of you who have large Pat McGrath Labs collections and you're wondering, what does this palette really bring to you? Does it really bring something new to the table, or are you just buying the same thing over and over again but then in different packaging? So I want to be helpful in that sense, so without further rambling, I'm just going to do the swatches of the actual palette and then we will jump into the comparisons. So the way I will do the swatches is by row. So I will first go through the first row and then I will go through the second row. I will tell you what the eyeshadows are called and approximately what kind of formula they feel to me. If there is something specific about the formula, I will mention it, about the texture of these eyeshadows. But other than that, I'm just going to go through it fairly quickly so that we can move on to the comparisons ASAP. So on this first row we have the shade Divine Dawn. Divine Dawn feels like one of those skin show shades. It's not called the skin show shades, and honestly it looked a little bit deceiving in the videos because it looked like it is a much sparklier shade, but in fact it's actually quite a satin finish. So essentially I would just call this a skin show shade. It's a beautiful like rosy color. Then we've got the shade Twilight Lilac, which is a matte, and you can see this is like a somewhat, you know, aubergine toned but not too warm toned of a purple. I'm a little bit disappointed, I won't lie to you, because I actually was hoping that this is going to be a lot cooler in tone. The next shade is Cosmic Fantasies. Cosmic Fantasies is actually quite interesting because on the swatches it looked like a straight up burgundy, but there's a little bit of depth to the tone, and quite interestingly it almost looks like it has a bit of like a greenish hue to it, and then this beautiful burgundy sparkle. So this is quite an interesting shadow. This is a metallic. I would call this like a satin metallic. Then we go into the corner where the Blitz Astral shades are located. So these two are also called Astral Eden Envy and Astral Sunset Splendor. Now texture-wise these do feel different compared to the shade that I swatched earlier, the Cosmic, what was it? Cosmic Fantasies. So they're not really comparable to like the metallic shades. They do feel a little bit more like the Blitz Astrals that we had in Moonlit Seduction. I'm going to bust out Moonlit Seduction in a little bit to literally just touch the eyeshadows to see whether they feel similar. They feel like a different texture. Obviously they're not baked gelée. We've already established that. I've talked about it so much. They're not baked gelée, but they do feel, you know, a little bit flakier, somewhat drier to the touch. They are quite sparkly. There's a lot of sparkle going on to these shades. This obviously has again quite a deep base, so it does remind me quite a bit of Subversive. I think there are going to be some differences. I think this actually leans possibly even more green than the one in Subversive. The Gigabyte shade is what I'm referring to, because Subversive has quite a strong antique golden tone to it, whereas this does look to have quite a fair amount of green sparkle to it. And then the last shade here, the Astral Sunset Splendor, is a beautiful like peachy apricot shade with a lot of like pink and gold sparkle to it. It's a very pretty shade. And this is the second row of eyeshadows, starting with the beautiful Nocturnal Bloom, which is a deep green matte eyeshadow. Now, I would say this has a very interesting tone to it because it's not really a blackened green, but it does have quite a bit of like a gray undertone to it. I wouldn't call it the blue-based green. By comparison, the one from Celestial Nirvana, which is really the only matte green eyeshadow that we have in Pat collection, is a lot brighter and a lot more blue-toned. So this is a lot more like a gray, desaturated forest green. Next shade is Astral Iridescent Iris. I think this shade is going to make a lot of people very happy. It is definitely a shade that feels different in terms of its texture, even to the other Blitz Astral shades. So just to note, this is sort of like an extra bonus Blitz Astral shades in this specific palette, because usually this corner here doesn't really have Blitz Astral shades in Pat's previous Mothership palettes. So here we usually have mattes, satins and metallics, and only here we get Blitz and Astrals. Now we're getting this special bonus Astral shade here, and boy does it feel like an actual Astral. This feels quite dry in texture and quite flaky, which is amazing because it means that it can be used as a topper shade, and it has quite a translucent base to it, and what I can see is a multitude of cool pink and blue purple sparkles to it. So this is a really pretty shade. The next shade is the Abomination, that is a matte with glitter that I don't even think you can see the glitter anymore. It just all flew away since I swatched it. This is the shade Lunar Nectar. This is more of like a terracotta nude shade, another type of shade we've seen a lot from Pat McGrath Labs. The next shade is, I think, one that is quite unique to this palette, because I can't think of a single eyeshadow in Pet's collection that is quite similar to this. This is a bright aqua blue with gorgeous blue and green sparkles to it. This is going to be such a beautiful lid shade. I can't wait to use this shade. And the final shade in this palette is called Blitz Bronze Supernova. Blitz Bronze Supernova is a neutral bronze with, you know, fine pinkish silverish sparkle to it. I wouldn't say it is a very unique shade in Pet's collection, absolutely not, but with that said, it is a very pretty undertone of brown, I think, like bronzy brown, because it doesn't lean too warm and it doesn't lean too cool. It actually leans quite neutral, and I think it's going to make for beautiful, like, neutral one and done moments. Okay, for the comparison swatches, the first thing I'm going to tell you is I don't really care to compare this shade here to other skin show shades. I just don't care enough about the skin show shades to care about, you know, dupes within Pet's collection. They all serve the same purpose, you know, they're either like a very neutral rosy lid shade, unless they have a bit more of a golden undertone to them, or they are an inner corner highlight, which, you know, is always handy to have in a palette. So I don't care for this one. I'm going to go for the obvious and easy choice, because I really want you to see the difference between the shade Nocturnal Bloom and the Green Matte in the Celestial Nirvana palette. So Celestial Nirvana was the first colorful offering that Pat McGrath Labs had in her collection. This is a holiday palette from a couple of years ago. It's in her Mega Mothership format, meaning that it doesn't contain the same kind of textures as a Mothership would contain, so there are no Blitz Astros in here. These are usually just mattes, metallics, satins, that kind of thing. So the shade I want to compare to obviously is this one here, and I think even like visually you can see that they are quite different from each other. So here we've got Nocturnal Bloom, here we have the green from Celestial Nirvana. Like I said, you can clearly tell that there is a lot of difference in here. This is much deeper, much more desaturated, this is more vibrant, more blue toned. With that said, I don't know that I would call this one necessarily blue or like more green toned, because it honestly looks so desaturated that it almost looks like a gray green compared to this one. Alright, here we have my Molded Seduction palette. So this is the first palette where she introduced this different Blitz Astral formula, which is not in her baked gelée format. So up until Mothership 9, the corner of the Blitz Astral shades always contained this beautiful baked gelée formula. She abolished that format with Mothership 10 Molded Seduction. Unfortunately, we haven't seen those baked shades since, I don't know, spring 2023 with the Bridgerton 2 palette. Now there are two shades here, namely the purplish aubergine shade and the terracotta shade, which even visually you can tell look kind of similar to the ones in the new palette. I want to open like a little bracket here, because I know a lot of people are asking themselves, why the hell does she keep giving us these aubergine purples and these terracotta shades? And I want to say that that might have something to do with the fact that they look really flattering, like they look like flattering contour shades on people of a very dark skin tone. Please, people who have a very dark skin tone, could you confirm or deny this rumor? Because I do have the feeling that, I mean, it's not that browns are not going to look good on you with the correct undertone, but I do have the feeling that Pat uses these sort of shades a bit as like contouring shades on deeper skin tones, and maybe she's like, you pasty people always get, you know, the light brown mattes, and the deeper skin tones never get anything to work with, so I'm going to continue giving them something to work with. Is that maybe what's going on? I don't know, please tell me. Anyway, I'm going to swatch the purple here with the purple from Molded. I think the purple for Molded is even more red toned, which is definitely not my preference. So here we have the purple from Petalmorphosis, and this is the aubergine purple from Molded Seduction. Like I said, quite different. This one by comparison looks quite much cooler. Don't you worry, I have other options for comparisons here as well. But this one has a lot more red to it. I would even call it like a maroonish, brownish red shade. This looks extremely unflattering on people with my skin tone. I think it looks like a bruise. I literally never use this shade. I think I would actually get a lot more use out of this purple than I would get out of this purple. Also, I just like went into a couple of these like astrally blitz type shades from the two palettes that, you know, are similar sort of textures, and I think that the formula that is present in Petalmorphosis is actually quite similar to the one in Moonlit. I can't really say anything about Sunlit Seduction because I didn't buy that palette. I don't know how those feel compared to the new palette and Moonlit Seduction, but at least from my standpoint, the ones that are present in the new palette are very similar to the ones that are present in the old palette. I've brought some purples. Let's compare. We've got a purple here in the, I want to say this is maybe like a more cool tone purple, maybe more similar to the one in the new palette. This is from the Passion Fluor Quad, which was limited edition the summer of last year. And this is the purple that I am talking about. There is also a purple in correspondingly the Bridgerton 1 and Bridgerton 2 palettes. Let me grab the Bridgerton 1 because I think that one is also somewhat cooler in tone. And let me grab the one from Bridgerton 2 as well, so that's this one here. Okay, you can let me know later if I'm missing something, but I'm actually really excited now that I've swatched all of these other purples, because all of these other purples, like purpley, maroony, reddish shades, look more similar to each other compared to the one in Petalmorphosis. The one in Petalmorphosis actually looks more cool tone. I'm sorry, after a short interruption from my son who wants chippies, we can continue. Like I said, these are actually much more similar to each other, much more warm-toned, mauve, red-toned, whereas this new one from Petalmorphosis is in fact a bit more cool-toned and a bit more purple than all of these other ones. I am quite excited. So just to recap, Petalmorphosis, Twilight, what was this called again? Twilight Lilac. Then we have Moonlit Seduction, Passion Fluor, Bridgerton 1, Bridgerton 2. I actually thought the one from the Passion Fluor would be similar, but it's not at all similar. Yay, I'm really excited for this purple. Yay, finally a somewhat more purple shade that is not maroon and red and... Well, you know, I like the one from Bridgerton 1 because you can see it's quite desaturated and mauve and it looks more like a neutral shade. I absolutely hate this one. This one is not my favorite either. I'm excited. Okay, let's watch the terracotta, or like the terracotta looking matte with sparkles, and see whether Pas Mariam was right. So if you've seen my video where I commented on the release of this palette, I did offer two different solutions for this specific shade because the only alternative that I could think of that is like a matte with shimmer was from this specific quint. This is the Bordeaux Bliss from Holidays 2023. So this is in her quint formula, but you know, it is the only matte with shimmers she has ever released before, prior to the one in Petalmorphosis. However, I thought that in terms of its undertone, the terracotta from Moonlit Seduction will actually be more similar, which I think now might be the case, but let's give them a spot. So when you compare this to the one from Moonlit, the one from Moonlit is what I would call a true terracotta, whereas the new one is more like a rosy matte. So for those of you who are complaining that it's pink and gold again, you win. There is an actual pink shade in here. I would call this one a pink terracotta, whereas this is more of a classic brown, orange, reddish terracotta. This one is not similar at all in terms of its color. The only similar thing is that they're both, you know, mattes with shimmer. It's a nice rosy shade though. You know what, let's compare it to this one here. This is from the Utopian Dream palette. This is one of my favorite like nude rosy shades from Pat McGrath Labs in terms of its undertone. Oh, interesting. So this is Utopian Dream and this is Petalmorphosis. Petalmorphosis is brighter and more of like a, you know, rose petal red, whereas this is actually more of a neutral rosy brown. I really love this shade. I'm curious how I'm going to feel about this one, but usually my preference would go towards this or something like the Molded Seduction shade. But let's find out once I start using the palette. I've kept here my Molded Seduction palette because I want to see whether the Astral Iridescent Iris is somewhat similar to the lilac shade in here. And of course I've busted out my Risque Rose Quad and we're going to compare to Lavendering. Now that I'm looking at the two of them, I don't find them to be all that similar, but I do think they're probably the most similar to each other. And also very similar to the Light Lavender from Molded Seduction. So I'm talking about this shade here, which you can see is a lot icier and a lot less like lavender purple compared to the new one. I hope that this is coming across well because I think this is one of the most important comparisons that I wanted to make.
So we've got Astral Iridescent Orchid here from Petalmorphosis. This is Lavendering from Risque Rose, and this is whatever the shade is called from Molded Seduction, something with lilac. It's also one of the Blitz Astral shades. I think in terms of their texture, they're all quite similar, but there are actually notable differences. So Astral Iridescent Orchid is probably the one that is the most like cool toned pinky purple amongst them, because compared to that, even Lavendering doesn't look as cool toned. The shimmer on Lavendering almost looks like a warmer toned pink, and this obviously has like this interesting like minty grayish base to it, which this one doesn't. This one is more of a translucent base. This one is also more of a translucent base, but by comparison it looks so much more like icy, more like an icy lavender compared to this one. This one is truly special, truly something unique to Petalmorphosis. I really like it. I can't wait to layer it over like a gazillion looks. I want to do a quick comparison here for the Bordeaux shade. Again, something that I had deduced based on the swatches in my emergency meeting video, where I mentioned that this shade here from the Luminous Legends palette, so this is her holiday limited offering for the past holiday, so that is Holidays 2024. And I mentioned that this burgundy Bordeaux shade reminded me of the new one. I don't actually think they're going to be similar, but you know what? Let's swatch them. And this is Bordeaux Brilliance from the Luminous Legends palette. They're actually very different from each other, because this one is more of a true Bordeaux with like a red tone to it, whereas this again has this very interesting, almost like olive green base to it, with purpley Bordeaux sparkles. This is a very interesting eyeshadow. It's obviously like a very smoky one, but it's also quite interesting, and I don't think that I can think of anything in Pet's collection that is really quite similar to this. This is much more unique than I anticipated. Okay, I know you're all waiting for this. Let's compare the greens. So I know that we've talked a little bit about this shade being very similar to the shade Gigabyte from the Subversive palette. I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm too lazy to bust out Subversive, but we've got the perfect dupe here in the Bridgerton 2 palette. This shade right here, which is called Forever Charmed, and is essentially both a formula dupe, a color dupe, everything dupe for Gigabyte in the Subversive palette. So I'm going to use this sort of as a proxy for Gigabyte. And you can tell, even just by looking at the two eyeshadows, what I meant earlier with Gigabyte being much more of like an antique gold green, with the new one being a bit more of like a true green gold. Now I'm thinking that this is more like the metallic shade from Midnight Sun, the something with envy. Let me bust that one out. But before I do that, I think there is actually also a similar shade here in this Star Wars Quint. No, this is much deeper in tone. We can swatch this, but it's going to be much deeper in tone. Yeah. Oh, actually, you know what? This is not that different from this one. This has brighter, like gold green sparkle to it. This is more smoky, but the base of these is quite similar. Unfortunately, it is nothing like what we were hoping for. I think a lot of us were hoping that the new shade is going to be something like this. This is Astral Lime from the, again, one of the Star Wars Queens, which was limited edition. This is the Divine Droid one. Not even close. I'm going to put that right here. No, not even close. But wouldn't that have been fantastic if she had a shade like this with a lot of sparkle in it? Here is Midnight Sun. We're going to be comparing two different like finishes and formulas. The new one is like a sparkly Blitz Astral type shade, and the one in Midnight Sun that I'm referring to is this one, and it's a metallic, like a satin metallic. So you could view Wicked Envy as the metallic satin sister to this new shade. They're essentially pretty similar in tone, except this one is much sparklier, and you know, it has that golden green shimmer running through it, like quite intense glitter, whereas this is a smooth, you know, metallic satin shade. And finally, if anyone was curious how it compares to the Celestial Jade green, obviously you can tell they're rather different greens, but just for shits. So here we have Celestial Jade from the Celestial Jade duo from these past holidays as well. So a lot of greens, some similar greens for sure. I think the one that I thought would be the most similar, which is Gigabyte, I'd say the shimmer on Gigabyte is rather similar to the shimmer of the new one. So let's say if you were to layer Gigabyte over top of Wicked Envy, which I can show you right now. Okay, what happens if we layer Gigabyte over Wicked Envy? Do we get a somewhat similar shade to the new one? I mean, this is more glittery, this is a bit smoother in texture, depending on how you apply it, of course, but I do think you can get quite similar if you own these two palettes. So, the shade Astral Sunset Splendor, this apricot peachy shade here, for some reason really reminded me of Rosefire Nectar from the Voyeuristic Vixen quad. So these two shades here, I don't think they are similar, but for some reason they bear similarities that, yeah, remind me of Rosefire Nectar. I mean, Rosefire Nectar is bonkers. The new one can't really hold a candle to it, but it's still a really beautiful shade. Yeah, this is like, you take this shade and like put a lot of fire in it and you get Rosefire Nectar. But this is very pretty. It's like this subdued apricot orange tone. I absolutely love this. I can show you the dupe that I had suggested for this in my emergency meeting video, just so we can see how far off I was. And the shade that I suggested is this one here, which is the only apricot shade that I could think of from Pet's collection. I actually really like the undertone of this new shade because it's more like that pastel apricot peach, whereas both of these other shades are much more intense, much more vibrant, much more sparkly. I love the pastel nature of this shade, it's very pretty. I'm going to keep Voyeuristic Vixen because, in fact, after I swatched this shade here, the Blitz Bronze Supernova, I was also immediately reminded of Twilight Bronze from the same quad, from Voyeuristic Vixen. So let's swatch both of these, and I will also swatch the shade that I had suggested as a dupe in my emergency meeting video, but now I can tell you that shade is going to be way too dark and not at all the same tone. So let's swatch the shade from Petalmorphosis right here, and this is Twilight, what was it called? Twilight Bronze. Wow. If these two aren't like one-on-one dupes for each other, I'm going to hang myself. This is the same shade. She's called it something different, but it is the same shade. Look at that. These two are identical, right? I'm not crazy. These are identical. By the way, this shade is also not what I would call her standard metallic formula. Like these two, they have a very interesting texture to them. So I would say even in terms of the texture, these two are quite similar to each other. So that was very interesting. I did not see that coming. That was a real plot twist. Okay, so the dupe that I had suggested in my original video was this one, which, as you can see now by comparison, much deeper, much more like a bronzy gold. I'm still really stuck on these two being essentially the same shade. Now I'm starting to doubt if I swatched the same shade twice. Let me redo this. Petalmorphosis. Quad. Nope. They still look like almost the same shade. You could split hairs and say that maybe this is a slightly bit deeper than this one, Petalmorphosis versus the quad, but gosh, they're so similar. And Rosefire Nectar is never coming off my hand. Alright, you guys, the shade Blitz Radiant Rhapsody. Again, I will reiterate, I don't think there's a dupe for this shade in Pet's collection. Nothing that is even remotely similar, but because I know I'm going to get questions about it, I will immediately bust out Nocturnal Nirvana and swatch these two shades here, the one that I had suggested as a dupe, which I feel like is, you know, rather similar in vein, but probably not the same, and this one here, which is a beautiful shade. I think it's called VR Emerald. Yeah, that's VR Emerald, but you can see this is so much more green, and it has like a purpley base to it. But let's just quickly give them all a swatch. You know what, I was actually not that far off. If you put a somewhat deeper base on this shade, you are basically going to get the Blitz Radiant Rhapsody shade, because the sparkle on this is exactly the same as the sparkle on the new shade. It's that beautiful like light blue greenish sparkle, but on a much lighter blue base. This is more of like a teal green, like a deeper teal green. This is a much lighter shade, but they are, you know, more similar to each other than I anticipated. Alright, you guys, I can't think of anything else to comparison swatch for you. I think we've swatched everything that I could literally think of right now. If you have any additional questions, please let me know. I can always send you side-by-side comparison swatches on Instagram or post them on my community tab or something, or do them in one of the consecutive videos, because I do plan to do a week of this palette. If I'm going to manage, I don't know, but I will try to create a variety of looks with it in the coming days. Now, I hope that this was useful to you and it satisfied your curiosity, and it either made you feel like Petalmorphosis has something new to offer, or you were convinced that it doesn't really add much to your collection. Let's refrain, you know, from giving too much opinions about it before I've used it, but I'm very happy because I do think it's quite different, and I do think that it has some unique aspects to offer. I mean, we're splitting hairs here, we are talking about subtleties in undertones and nuances and depths in tone and stuff like that, but these things matter to me, so I'm personally quite happy to have this palette. Now that I've done all the comparison swatches. Okay, thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
By the way, I don't know if you noticed, but even my nails this week are inspired by Petalmorphosis because I have green and purple on my nails. A bit more like a pastel version of it, but still, I was inspired by Petalmorphosis. Okay, so for the first look that I wanted to do today, I just cannot stop thinking about this shade here, the Blitz Radiant Rhapsody shade, and I really want to try the matte green. So I'm going to do a look incorporating this shade, definitely this shade, maybe as a topper, maybe also as an inner corner or like lower lash line accent. I want to potentially try to see what this shade does. So, you know, a variety of different things are going to happen here. But the first thing I'm going to do is I will take this green shade here and I will put it through my outer corner and crease. And hopefully I don't have to resort to any sort of, you know, browns or bronzer shades to blend out my crease. I'm just going to take a little bit of this shade on a fluffy blending brush and I'm going to apply it here in the outer portion of the eye. Just pack a little bit of this and I'm going to clean off my brush now on a little microfiber cloth before I start blending it upwards, because I don't want to have a really dark crease, but I also don't want to take out a different palette to blend out my crease. I just want to use this palette and I'm going to just blend very, very lightly. You don't have to bring the color too much up. It can also be quite subtle like this. The shade is applying really beautifully and it's honestly applying as it swatches, like a desaturated dark forest green. So it has a little bit of a gray tone to it as well. I quite like this shade. I think it's very interesting and it's quite unique. I have other forest greens that definitely lean more forest green than this one. I do actually quite like the tone of this shade. It's very pretty. It's going to make an awesome liner. But I also think it looks beautiful as an outer corner shade. It's blending out beautifully, but I've personally never really had much issues with Pat's matte formulas. They've definitely evolved since the first 5 motherships. I think in the first 5 motherships they were still quite hard pressed and sometimes quite stiff and maybe even patchy, but since Mothership, I think 6 and 7, they've been an absolute dream to work with. Next I'm going to grab a flat shader brush and honestly I'm just going to go into that Blitz Radiant Rhapsody shade and I'm going to apply that all over my lid. And I will also bring it to the crease, towards the crease, to blend it, because I'm curious how well that's going to work out. That is a very pretty and very unique shade in Pat's collection. I can tell you she doesn't really have anything quite like this. This is gorgeous. So I'm just applying that here on the biggest portion of my lid, leaving like the inner portion of my lid a little bit more free. Once I've applied a solid amount of this shade, I'm going to grab my little blending brush again and I'm going to blend here through the crease, just to demonstrate that you don't even necessarily need like a brown to blend out this shade. Now in the blending process, obviously you're going to remove some of the sparkle, so what I usually do in this case is I will either reapply a bit more with my finger later or apply the tiniest bit of glitter glue and go back for full impact, which is possibly what I'm going to do in a tiny bit. But you can see it's blending out very, very nicely. Okay, now I'm going to grab the absolute tiniest bit of glitter glue and I'm going to pop that on my lids as well as on the inner portion of my lids. And then also here in the inner portion of like the tear duct area. And then I'm just going to actually use my finger, go back into Blitz Radiant Rhapsody, and now I'm going to go for more impact here. This is a very pretty shade. Now, as I mentioned, I really would like to layer a bit of that Astral Iridescent Iris shade over this shade. But before I do that, I'm going to give you a sparkle moment because I'm curious how much glitter this shade has on its own. It doesn't have the absolute chunkiest type of glitter, but it is still quite sparkly from what I can see here in the viewfinder. But it's such a beautiful, you know, teal blue light aquamarine with green sparkles to it. I really like this shade. Now, as I mentioned, I cannot wait to put this shade over top, so I'm just going to take a few flakes of this. I don't want this shade to overtake the green, but I do want the two of them to sort of play together, so I'm going to apply a little bit of that Astral Iridescent Orchid shade right here in the center portion of the lid, and I'm going to work it just in the center of the lid together with the green shade. Okay, I'm going to actually bring the green shade quite much inwards now because I've decided what I want to do for the rest of the look. I wasn't quite decided up until this point, but now I've decided I'm going to bring this shade inwards, and then I'm going to take the shade Divine Dawn, which is the Skin Show type shade here, and that's going to go in the tear duct area, but I'm not going to bring it on the lower part. I'm just going to bring it here and like blend it a bit upwards towards my brows. And I'm too lazy to grab a different brush, so I just flipped the brush on which I had Blitz Radiant Rhapsody. This is essentially a Skin Show shade, you guys. I don't know why in the promo pictures and like images and videos it looked like it was a different texture, like a much more glittery, sparkly texture. It's not, it's just a satin, beautiful, you know, Skin Show type of shade. Now for my lower lashes, I actually want to mix up the green and the purple, and I'm very curious how this purple is going to apply. So I'm going to grab a little bit of Twilight Lilac, and I'm going to pop that here on the lower lashes, but I'm not going to bring it all the way in. I'm going to bring it about halfway in. Oh, that's nice. I like that. Do I wish this was a little bit of a cooler toned purple? Yes, I do. I absolutely wish that this shade was even more cool toned than it is now. I'll still take it because it's not one of her classic maroon shades that I absolutely hate, but it still could have been a little bit more cool toned for my taste. So I'm going to take the same brush and I'm going to just use the tip of the brush like this, and I'm going to press that Astral Iridescent Orchid shade here as a little accent. It will almost create the effect of little like lavender teardrops. And here is sparkle moment for you in its full glory. Oh, I think the Blitz Radiant Rhapsody shade together with that Astral Iridescent Iris, they look so beautiful together. Alright, you all, so this is the first look with the Petalmorphosis palette. I consider it to be quite a success. I'm really pleased with the combinations of the shades. I think it looks really pretty. Obviously, this is a very colorful look. This is not going to be in everyone's comfort zone, so I think if you prefer more like nude, subdued, neutral looks, there are other eyeshadows in here that you could use, and you could possibly use all of these colorful ones for like little accents. Like the Blitz Radiant Rhapsody shade would probably look absolutely beautiful as like a little liner moment with some of these like neutral shades or on its own. But honestly, if you're not into color, I also don't think you should buy this palette. Now, this is not a review. I want to make this very clear. This is just my first thoughts, my first impression. I have to say my first impression is overall quite positive. When I opened the package yesterday, I had this moment when I thought, oh gosh, what if I open it and I'm really disappointed? And when I first opened it and I glanced at the textures of the shades, I thought, these look like, you know, we're getting a Decadence type of palette. But then I swatched them, I felt them, and I thought, okay, I feel more certain now that this is quite similar to the Molded Seduction palette. So if you enjoyed the textures that are present in the Moonlit Seduction palette, I don't think you're going to mind these. They're not crazy Blitz Astros like the, you know, think of something like the Blitz Astros in Utopian Dream. They are nothing at that level, but they're still very sparkly, they're still very dimensional. I think they're beautiful colors, and like I said, my first impression is overall quite positive. I will of course come back to do a couple of more looks with this palette before I make up my mind, but I need to get to know this palette a lot more. I'll need to get to know it in the context of the rest of my Pat McGrath collection, so I think it will really be quite a few months before I can give you my full rounded thought. At the end of the few looks that I will create with it, I can give you an impression of like the quality of this palette and what I think about it, maybe as a standalone palette, but in the context of my collection, how much I'm going to enjoy it ultimately, I think that's going to take a little bit more time. I need to take my time, I need to see how much use I'll get out of it, how it will place, you know, in my heart compared to my other motherships before we can talk about the full review. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this video up. I hope that it was helpful for you. Let me know in the comment section below what you thought about it, what you thought about the look, the comparisons. Like, what do you guys think about Petalmorphosis? Did you get yours? What are your feelings about it? I can't wait to chat with you in the comment section below. As usual, thank you so very much for watching, and we will see each other again very, very soon. Bye!